to work with our families on education, because as we all know right now, there is a lot going on in the world of our children, especially when it comes to drugs and alcohol. And we were connected with the great speaker that you're going to hear tonight. And Dr. Dole will be sharing his bio in a few minutes. I think you're going to be wowed. He's actually been to quite a few of our schools and met with the students as well. This meeting that we're doing is English only tonight. We were asked by our board members to really make sure that we are providing our Spanish speaking families with the same opportunities. So next week, actually a week and a half, on November the 3rd, Rocky will be joining us again, and that entire presentation will be all in Spanish. We want to make sure that our Spanish speaking families are getting an equal opportunity to hear the great work that's going on. So without further ado, back to Dr. Doyle so he can introduce our fabulous two guests.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Free. Really appreciate you being here and appreciate the work you're doing behind the scenes for our families. So before I introduce Rocky, I wanted to thank all the parents and the community members for jumping on tonight. We have over 30, and we will probably grow over the next 10 to 15 minutes as people are getting off work and getting home. Thank you for being diligent with your duties as a parent and as a community member. We all need to work together to protect our kids. I have 3 sons of my own, and I feel just as passionate as all of you do about how we can keep our children safe and we can make sure that they make good choices. And the best way for students and children to make good choices is for parents to really work closely with them to help them understand how to make good choices. So thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it. We do have the chat open right now as Rocky begins, so that if you have questions, Dr. McCain and I will monitor that, and we'll make sure we try to answer as many questions as possible. But I also know, because I've listened to Rocky, that he has a lot of very detailed information that you'll hear tonight. I'm sure you'll be riveted by the information. So we may not get to everyone's question tonight, and I want to apologize ahead of time. We're not trying to be rude, but I know that you will want to hear all of this information because it's powerful, it's compelling. So with that, I would like to introduce Rocky Heron. Rocky is a former DEA agent with over 31 years of experience. He now works for the San Diego County Office of Education as their Drug Prevention Education Ambassador. So we appreciate you being here. He has presented to schools in our district as well, parents since 2007, and has given over 800 lectures to more than 160,000 young people across 15 different countries. That's impressive. Rocky is passionate about addressing the damaging impacts of illegal drug use on the individual, on the family, and the community. Over the next few months, Rocky will be visiting our middle and high schools to share this important message with our young people, especially the current trends in opioids and fentanyl. Just yesterday, Rocky presented his powerful message to the 7th graders at Rancho Minerva Middle School here in Vista, and today was at Roosevelt presenting to grades 6, 7, and 8. About 1,000 of our district students already have received his message. So Rocky, we truly appreciate you being here. You don't have to, I know that you don't accept all the speaking engagements, but we are honored to have you, and we certainly are ready to listen tonight and ready to do our part to help our community. So thank you so much, Rocky, and take it away.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Doyle, and I'll repeat the thanks to all of you for tuning in. You know, I prefer to work in the schools because I get the kids as a captive audience. And I do parent events, and I know the districts heavily advertise these events, and still we get a handful of people tuning in. So I appreciate you for tuning in. I do have a lot of information to share. I'm going to go very rapidly to try and get out as much information as I can. I'm not going to give you the same presentation I give the kids. Today I was able to speak 3 times for 90 minutes to the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders at Roosevelt. And but I'm going to give you a snapshot of what I share with the kids, and I picked up a little bit of a different focus for my adult presentations, and I'm calling it the perfect storm. So I'll share my PowerPoint now with you and go through why I'm calling it a perfect storm for our kids. I have been a DEA agent for 31 years. 15 years ago, I discovered we weren't doing any kind of organized drug prevention education for our kids in my own kids' schools. My oldest daughter was in 5th grade at the time. So I came up with a small presentation to try and fill the gap. And over the last 15 years, just by really invitations and people asking me to come, I've now done 800 assemblies and I'm far from finished. So I'm very grateful to Vista Unified and Dr. Doyle and Dr. McKean for giving me the opportunity to start reaching the kids in the schools. And I'm hoping this becomes a permanent or ongoing relationship. I show this picture in the schools and I ask the kids, who is that guy, that handsome young guy? And sometimes the kids get it right. They go, that's you. And I put that picture in there not to cry about getting old, but kids don't want to receive the drug prevention message. They're tuned out. They don't think they have anything to learn. And I show this just to point out that I've been doing this for 31 years. And in the DEA, we don't chase drug users, but when you're chasing drug dealers, you have to see what drugs are doing to individuals in our families, our homes, in our country, in the world. And after 8 years of working in San Diego as an agent, I was sent to Bolivia and South America, and I chased cocaine traffickers there. And the 6 years I was chasing cocaine traffickers in Bolivia taught me a lot. This lab out in the jungle of Bolivia that I set on fire was producing cocaine that was destined for the United States. And the money that was used to build this laboratory came from American drug users. So I saw firsthand what America's drug habit is doing to foreign countries. And then I saw just tragically what it's doing to our country. These are photos towards the end of my career when I was seizing methamphetamine. And in the photos, we see seizures of this hideous drug of more than 100 pounds. And 10 years before these photos, I would seize 10 pounds of methamphetamine and DEA would congratulate me. That was a good case. But as I retired, the seizures were climbing 200 pounds, 500 pounds, 5,000 pounds. And I really think, unfortunately, today, the drug traffickers are laughing at us because these are synthetic drugs, meaning the drug factories in Mexico and other places can just produce as much as they want. So if we seize 1,000 pounds, they produce 2,000 pounds more. Too many parents don't understand how radically different the world of drugs is today for our kids. And this is a big challenge I face. And that's why, if I get a few parents to tune in, that's great, but I really want to work with as many kids as I can. So at least the kids understand what's going on around them. A 13-year-old took fentanyl, which I'll talk about in a minute, to his middle school, used it and died. Tragic for all involved. And the police investigation revealed that the kid had 100 baggies of it in his bedroom at home and 40 baggies of it in a backpack at school. So your kids are living in a reality where a classmate can bring a deadly drug to school or to the next party they attend and smile at your child and say, look, you should try this. It's just like marijuana, but better. And at the moment, most of our kids are not informed about how dangerous that offer and that decision can be. Another terrible headline from California, a 16-year-old was charged with murder for giving 12-year-old girl fentanyl and killing her. We now live in a world where teenagers who give or distribute drugs to other young people and harm them can be charged with homicide. I don't necessarily agree with that, but at the same time, I don't know what we're supposed to do when kids are killing other kids with the drugs today. And then in Seattle or in Tacoma, a mom took her 2-year-old son to the playground. Before she could stop him, she saw her baby pick something blue up off the ground and put it in his mouth, and he promptly overdosed on fentanyl. And it was a miracle that the police officer who responded was able to save that child. But this is how dangerous the situation is, and how dangerous the drugs are that are surrounding our kids. And then this is not a typo. In 2021, the seizure of the counterfeit pharmaceutical pills made with fentanyl went up almost 5,000% in 1 year. And it's been climbing year over year. But that increase of 5,000% doesn't mean that law enforcement got 5,000% better at its job. It means that there's simply that much more being produced and shipped across the border to get to your kids and my kids and all of our kids. And it's terrifying. This drug is truly terrifying. But I never just talk about fentanyl. I'm scared about fentanyl and I'm preoccupied about it, but I also know what the super potent marijuana and the concentrated marijuana is doing to our kids, and it's horrible. And I'll talk about that a little bit tonight. And then alcohol has dropped off the radar. But during the pandemic, there's some really sad trends. A lot of families endorsed their young children drinking alcohol at home. And I worry, because we're not really talking much about alcohol, I worry about where we're going to be in 10 years with kids who are drinking too heavily. And I did this sad assessment as I retired from DEA last year. The drugs available to your kids are stronger, easier to get, and cheaper, and more socially acceptable than ever before. I believe, and it's my opinion as a former law enforcement officer, that at the moment, we can't do a whole lot about those first three. The big drug or global drug organizations are outproducing and outgunning law enforcement. But I do believe we can do a lot to change number 4. We can fight back against the culture our kids have grown up in that tells them drug use is normal, it's part of being a teenager, nobody gets hurt, all lies. But it's difficult to find movies, TV shows, videos on the internet designed for our kids that don't have some kind of a message telling them that drug use is cool and desirable. And we're not fighting back in an organized way. And then, the mental health issue of our kids is really scary. I mean, we've all seen this coming. Certainly the lockdowns and COVID contributed to more anxious and depressed and lonely and isolated kids. But the CDC did some surveys last year that came up with some really horrible results. Nationwide, 44% of our teenagers identified as persistently sad and hopeless. Now, I'm a little shocked that that alone didn't create a national crisis conversation. United States of America, 44% of our future generation saying they're persistently sad and hopeless, 55% saying that they feel like they're victims of emotional abuse. And I attribute much of that to the smartphones and so-called smartphones and to social media. And I believe that the phones have changed how our kids communicate. I think it's created a difficulty in communicating between each other. A lot of our kids, I don't think, really know how to have serious conversations with their peers. Everything they're doing is over social media and chat on the phones. And then social media itself has created in our children, I believe, a fear of showing weakness and pain and humanity. I mean, you don't put a picture on social media if you don't use the beauty filter. And our kids, I think, are therefore less capable of communicating pain to each other and dealing with it and trying to deal with it productively. And I think they're less willing to because of the whole social media mindset that you have to pretend to be perfect all the time. And I'm calling it a perfect storm. And I think we have more kids today, and the CDC is documenting it, more kids that are anxious and depressed and lonely and isolated than ever before. And a society where these super potent drugs like fentanyl and meth and the super potent THC are widely available, and the kids try it. And the power of the drugs is so strong that some percentage of our kids are lost to us. I mean, once they experience the chemical escape from their pain that the drugs offer them, it's very difficult for us to reach them with any of our counseling and therapy and our societal resources. And I don't like to use a whole bunch of statistics, but I do talk about overdose death. And when I started in the DEA as a special agent in 1990, we were losing 10,000 Americans a year dying from drugs. That seemed like, and still does seem like to me, a very large number, particularly when you meet the grieving survivors. But today, the number we're losing isn't 10,000 a year, it's almost 10,000 a month, which means almost 300 a day. And I tell the kids in my assemblies that about a dozen Americans will die during the short time of my assembly talking about the drug problem. And as a nation, we're not getting out in front of this. There is no national conversation about prevention education. Again, that's why I'm grateful to Vista Unified, because they're reaching out to use what resources we have available now. And hopefully when society catches up and maybe mandates, more intensive training and things, then I can ride off into the sunset. But in the meantime, I'm going to take advantage of these windows of opportunity to give the kids as much information as I can. In San Diego, we are not doing well at all. I spent most of my career here, and the number of dying people in San Diego from drugs is about 350 a year from all different types of drugs, mostly methamphetamine. But in 2016, we really started to see the methamphetamines importing from Mexico climb. And the death numbers have followed. And last year it was over 800 people dying just from fentanyl and about 1,200 total. And the medical examiner in San Diego has difficulty keeping up. There's so many people dying that they don't have enough medical examiners to do the investigations, and it's getting worse. And I'm telling you, and I'm telling every audience, as sad as the numbers are I'm sharing today, if we don't do something radically different, it's just going to keep getting worse. So I created this video to show the kids what those numbers mean. What's the human impact? I'm going to share it with you. And this is a video showing people who died from overdoses. You'll see their name, the age they died, and the drug or drugs that killed them. And this is kind of a magic tool for me in the schools. And this gets the kids tracking.
Should have stayed, were the signs I ignored. Can I help you not to hurt anymore? We saw brilliance when the world was asleep. There are things that we can have but can't keep. If they say, who cares if one more light goes out in the sky of a million runs out. If a moment is all we are, or quicker, quicker, who cares if one more light goes out? Well, I do. Who cares if one more light goes out in the sky of a million stars? It flickers, flickers. Who cares when someone's time runs out? If a moment is all we are, or quicker, quicker. Who cares if one more light goes out? Well, I do. Well, I do.
10,000 this month, 300 today, and you know, maybe a dozen or so in the short time that I'm talking about this problem with you. And in the middle schools in Vista today and yesterday, when we get down to the kids, you know, 12 and 9, they start shouting out the numbers. I mean, they're so shocked to see that this is harming small children. And for me, it's just a magical educational tool to show them nobody is safe from this, because of course our kids are kids. They want to believe that they can do these things and it's never going to happen to them. So it's powerful, and it causes hopefully some emotional learning to go on, right? So some of this information sticks in their brains. So in the future, whenever it happens that somebody offers them drugs, you know, they're more prepared to say, no, thank you. And then I talked about the addicted babies, and this problem just drives me insane. I discovered 12 years ago that we have about 35,000 babies born every year addicted to opioids that their mothers were using during pregnancy. And that's in addition to many thousands, tens of thousands more of babies damaged by alcohol and cocaine and methamphetamine and now marijuana. A huge number of babies now are being born impacted because their mothers are smoking marijuana. But I talk about the opioid addicted babies because those 35,000 moms know that they're harming their babies when they use, but they're so afraid of the pain of withdrawal sickness that they keep using the drugs, and the babies are born just as addicted as the moms. And I point out this beautiful baby in our country is not getting vitamins from those nurses. It's getting the painkiller morphine to try to take away some of the pain given to it by its mother.
A crying baby is always unsettling. And it's even worse when you know the baby, like this little girl, just days old, is in pain. Her jittery shakes and her shrill cry are very distinctive, and they last for days. Doctors know exactly what's to blame.
Heroin.
This video is a couple years old. That doctor today would be saying fentanyl. And of course, the kids don't know what morphine is. So I try to explain. I work with Wounded Warriors here in San Diego, and when my friends were fighting in Afghanistan, they stepped on landmines and they were injured, as you can tell. And when these guys fell on the battlefield, their fellow soldiers came and gave them morphine. So I point out to my audiences, and I'm asking you to take a moment to reflect on that in our country today, somewhere close to 35,000 babies are born in such pain from their mother's choices to use drugs that we have to give them the same medicine we give men this badly injured in combat. And we're not talking about this problem. And I think if we're not talking about it, we're not necessarily trying to fix it. And I can't stand that. I really can't tolerate that. Who else gets hurt? These are powerful images, very effective with your kids. I talked about this 4-year-old boy in the car with his dad and the dad's girlfriend. The adults are heroin users. They inject heroin in the car and are driving around, you know, just a normal day for them in Ohio. But the woman injected too much heroin and she overdoses and passes out just like you see her. Her boyfriend panicked, tried to get her to the hospital to save her life. When he passed out from his own overdose, vehicle went out of control. The little 4-year-old kid in the backseat thinks dad's dead, thinks the girlfriend's dead, surrounded by strangers. And yet when we look on his face, we don't see any emotional reaction at all. And I've consulted with psychiatrists and psychologists about this one, and everyone agrees with me that this is just something he's used to. It's not the first time. This might be the first time this child's been out in public when this happened, but I have to wonder how many times this little boy experiences at home, you know, and have to put himself to bed alone or have to feed himself alone, you know, and I wonder how bad the emotional damage in him is, and how is he going to be at 15? How is he going to be at 25 when he has his own children? So my philosophy is this one. We are doing a lot of work right now on focusing on law enforcement to try to help on this problem. We're, thank God, finally talking about getting more treatment resources, more rehabilitation resources, but that's very expensive and very hard to do to recover people. So my entire effort is focused on getting information to kids before they put themselves on this road. I mean, I'm not going to be with them at the party. You, the parents, are not going to be with your kids at the party. We have to give them the information and the mental preparation to understand the risk of the choice their friend is offering them and to get them to say, no, thank you. I tell your kids, I'm not asking you to abandon your friends. I'm asking you to tell anybody if offers you a drug. All I need is for you to say, I don't do that. No, thank you. Or I'll try it next time, or I don't feel like it's tonight, whatever kind of excuse they have to give not to use it. Right. So that's my mission. My program is called I Choose My Future. I don't say just say no to drugs. I say it's all your guys' choice. You're going to decide who you become in the future. You're going to make the decisions that define your reality. I want to give you enough information so you can make informed choices. But you know, we have a stigma in our society against prevention education. I've had to work against this for 15 years. People tell me prevention education doesn't work. They tell me assembly-based education doesn't work. And so I don't even know what it doesn't work mean. What does that mean? I mean, every single kid that comes out of my assemblies, I talked to 750 of your middle schoolers today. Every single kid left those assemblies better informed about the consequences of their choices. How is that not working? Obviously, I'm not going to get every kid to stop using drugs or never use drugs. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to change their perceptions about the consequence of the choice. And I believe if we do that successfully and repeatedly, some of them are going to make smarter choices. But this is what people think I'm going to do.
Now, as I was saying, drugs are bad. You shouldn't do drugs. If you do them, you're bad. Because drugs are bad, okay? It's a bad thing to do drugs, so don't be bad by doing drugs, okay? That'd be bad. Drugs are bad.
And when I play that video from South Park, I see a bunch of kids like furtively looking over at me because I'm wondering if I'm Mr. Mackey. And I point out that I know I look just like him, but you know, what I do in the schools is quite different. And it's a way to break the ice, and the kids like that little bit of humor that I add. And these are photos of just, you know, the work that actually matters to me. I was giving a presentation in San Ysidro just a couple of weeks ago to a Spanish group. And one of the fathers came up to me in Spanish and said, Rocky, that work you did for 30 years, that was all training. You've now found your true calling. And I gave the man a hug and I thanked him because I think that's true. These pictures matter way more to me than any of the drug case investigation pictures I have. But as I travel around the world, and it's 15 countries now, and I talk to kids, I've been really surprised. You know, they understand everything I'm talking about. I'm fluent in Spanish, but even sometimes I speak through translators. The kids still get the message. And I realize that this drug culture is global. I mean, these kids in these foreign countries are watching the same garbage on TV that your kids are and my kids are. The same movies and TV shows and junk on Netflix and on TikTok and Snapchat telling them drug use is cool. Look at me. I did everything. I'm on top of the world. It's all lies. Yeah, but that's the message our kids are getting all the time. This group of guys in Honduras, after I spoke in their high school, I went to talk to them and they all turned their backs on me. And I walked over anyway and I said, hey guys, you know, how many of you have ever thought about living in the United States? And it was amazing. They all turned around because they've all thought about, wow, what would it be like to live in the United States, to have the opportunities that American kids had? And when I show them the same presentation I show your kids, and I show them all the young American teenagers who throw away their dreams, you know, to get high on drugs, these young men ask me why. Why would American kids with all those possibilities to get an education and build their lives, why would they throw it all away on drugs? And it's a great question that I can't answer. I don't know what's going on in our culture that's creating this willingness to poison ourselves and our kids. But I love my work. I truly do, and I'm far from done. The County Office of Education has been amazing and giving me this opportunity to go out and say yes to any district or any school or club or church that asks me. There's a limit to how much work I can do, but I'm hoping we can train up some more people to go out and do their version of what I'm doing as well. I talk about these guys in juvenile hall. This is a group out in, it's called East Mesa. It's in Otay Mesa. And I went to speak to them and they hated me. When I was introduced, they started flipping me off and calling me bad names. They didn't want to hear my message. And I continued to give it, and I thought they would calm down and stop insulting me, and they did not till the very end. But when I finished, I didn't quit on them. And when I finished, it was different. And these young men who an hour before this picture had been flipping me off and cursing me out, when I said, would you guys stand for a picture to show if you support what I'm doing? They all stood. And that's very powerful for me, because at the end of my presentation, these young men finally realized what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to prevent them. I'm trying to prevent the circumstances they grew up in that created them, right? Because all of them have suffered from drug abuse in their homes. It has a huge, huge causal factor for them ending up in juvenile hall. And they finally realized it. So I show this in the schools, really more for me, because I'll never know if your kids are listening to me. I hope they are. But, I believe if I can get this group of wounded, angry, hurting young men to see some value in my message, that some of your kids are going to get the message as well. This is San Marcos Middle School, Woodland Park Middle School in San Marcos on Monday. At the end of my lengthy presentations, I asked the kids, hey, if you understood everything I talked about and you thought this assembly was worth your time, would you raise your hands? So I'm very happy with the validation that these kids give me. And this is today. These are the 7th graders at Roosevelt Middle School in Vista. At the end of my 90-minute presentation, I was tired. I'm sure they were tired. I asked the kids, if you thought this was worth your time, would you raise your hands? So that's what keeps me going. I don't have the ability to do long-term surveys on the kids. I'll never know, 6 months from now, if any of the information I gave them sticks, but I'll take this. I'll take this engagement with the message. And I believe that some of it's going to be retained in them. Half of what I share to them and to you is my experience as a parent. I have 3 daughters. They're now 27, 24, and 22. And I learned a lot. I blame them for me being bald. It's hard being a parent of adolescents today. Really, it's hard. It's harder than ever to be an adolescent. And as a consequence, it's harder for us to be parents of adolescents. The world has changed so radically in the last 10 years. The phones, social media, drugs, everything is so much more intense, and our kids are oversaturated. And then you add in COVID and all these complications. And our kids are just drifting, or too many of them are just drifting and confused. One of the messages I give your kids is that for the drug dealers, they're not human beings, they're dollar signs. I need them to understand the drug dealers that they meet in their lives are going to smile and promise them that the drug they're giving them or selling them is pure and safe, and they should trust the drug dealer. But in this picture, we see an infant who has heroin taped to his body, and his parents did that to smuggle the drug across the border from Tijuana to San Diego. And they got caught, and the baby went to Child Protective Services, and the parents went to prison. But I point out to the kids, if this family cared so little about harming their baby transporting the drugs, how much do you think they care about you if you harm yourself using those drugs? And the kids get the message, they listen. And I talk about the brain development. And that's something you as parents, I think, really need to focus in on. Your kids between 11 years old and about 23 years old are going through their greatest period of brain development in their lives. And that's why they get more independence and they can handle harder material every year, because they're more capable. And science is discovering that as our kids use drugs and alcohol to change how their brains are working as adolescents, they're not just changing how the brain's working, they're changing how it grows. And these are amazing images from a Dr. Ammon, who studied the impact of substances on the blood flow in the human brain. And in the top 2 images, you see a person who has not perfectly balanced blood flow. There's no substances, alcohol or drugs in that brain. But if you go around the wheel, we see someone on marijuana, smoking opioids, cocaine, alcohol, and meth. But if we go back to that one on the right, that 17-year-old is smoking marijuana, we see dark spots on that brain. Those dark spots are not dead brain or holes in the brain. Those are parts of the brain where there's no blood flow. That young man smoking marijuana has changed the blood flow inside his own head. He can't see it. He can't perceive it. He's convinced that nothing's going on like that. But of course, if those areas of his brain aren't getting blood, they're not functioning. But because he's 17, if he's doing this chronically, those parts of his brain are not getting blood to grow. It's incremental damage, and he can't see it happening, but it is happening inside his head. But our society has told our kids that marijuana is not even a drug. I go to some high schools and the kids ask me why I'm talking about marijuana. They tell me, Rocky, it's not a drug. Why are you talking about it? That's the brainwashing we've done on them. I'm very upset about what we're doing in Mexico. I was just in Mexico last week teaching 3,800 high school students in Mexico City, and about the same message, right? Because they're beginning to suffer this too. But our drug habit here in the US is funding the violence of the drug cartels across the planet. And I'm deeply concerned how our government just seems to ignore this. And we point the finger at Mexico and blame Mexico for our drug problems. And I wonder when we start pointing the finger at ourselves. And I show the kids this picture of San Diego and Tijuana from space. And from space, it looks like one urban area. I mean, you really can't tell the 2 cities apart very well. We share the oceans and beaches and mountains, but we all know there's a border there. And if we live on the San Diego side of that border, we're living in one of the safest big cities in America, thankfully. But if we happen to live or have family that live in the Tijuana side, those folks are living in officially the most violent city on the planet. Not one of, the most violent city on the planet. And it's almost incomprehensible to me. How can that be? We're sister cities. We share almost everything. And yet Tijuana is officially the most violent city on the planet. And the only explanation I have for that is so many Americans who don't care about hurting themselves by using drugs certainly don't care who they hurt when they spend their money on drugs. And that money all funnels down and funds the drug violence in northern Mexico. And then, our kids are different today. The phones have changed them. I think all of us as adults would acknowledge that the phones have changed our kids, but I think what we don't understand is how. I think it's going to take us decades to unpack and research how the smartphones and social media has changed communication in our kids, changed their self-esteem, changed their ability to communicate, changed their understandings of the world. And we're not giving them, I think, enough guidance on this. And then you add in social media and this whole need to be perfect, this fake world that we've created and surrounded our kids with. And for many, it is a drug. It is a drug. These programs are all, these social media programs are all designed to get the same dopamine and serotonin releases in the brain that actual drugs do. And, and I'm guilty of this. I have a lot of regrets now. I worked too hard as a DEA agent. I was out trying to save the world and I was not home enough with my kids. And even when I was home, I was often had my mind in my work and I really regret it. And I know a lot of families are going through this and the communication in the home is broken down. So we have a lot of teenagers who aren't able to communicate with each other. They're not communicating effectively at home. I don't know how many people, how many adults and guardians are in the Vista Unified School District, but I imagine it's 10, 20,000. And we have, 51 people tuned in tonight. So God bless you all for tuning in. I appreciate you. The trick is, how do we reach the other 99.999% of the parents, who need to get this message? And so this is where we are, right? I mean, the kids are seeing things on the phones. I'll tell your kids in an audience, I'll say, hey, you guys are going places and seeing things on your phones you're not telling anybody about. And the kids all give me this little guilty look, like, oh, he got me. Well, of course they are. We all would have it too. If we were 12 and had a smartphone, we would have been looking up all sorts of inappropriate stuff. And they're getting it unfiltered. And we as parents, maybe you can filter it out and block it. I don't know really if you can, because they can use their friend's phone to do the same thing, even if you block yours. But I think our kids are being exposed to influences that we can't even comprehend, and they're having to figure this out on their own. And these are my laws of substance abuse. Substance abuse that I teach to the kids. It's going to be a choice. It's not I was in denial as a parent. I thought my kids were too good to have problems. All three of my daughters had what turned out to be kind of smallish problems with drugs and alcohol, but they all had some encounters with drugs and alcohol, as hard as I tried to keep them away from it. And I was in denial. I thought my kids were too smart and I was too good of a parent for this to happen. And I think most of us as parents think our kids are too smart, and they think it's going to be some obviously bad kid that tricks our kids into using drugs. That's not what it is. It's their friend, their teammate, their neighbor, the cousin, somebody they know and trust comes up and says, hey, look what I got. Let's do this. And our kids have to make a choice. And I explained it's not complicated. It's yes or no. And if it's yes, you'll get high or drunk or whatever, and then you'll have to deal with the consequences. And I explained to them, if you don't want to, then just tell them no, or tell them you'll think about it. Tell them you'll do it next time. I'm trying to give the kids some little basic refusal skills. Number two, people that go down the road of drug abuse change in negative ways. Nobody improves as a human being by using marijuana regularly or drinking alcohol, in my opinion. And, I use the example, it might be fun to be at a party with some teenager that's smoking weed. It's not fun to live with a teenager who's addicted to weed. And I'll use another example. It might be fun to be with someone who's drunk at a party. It's not fun to live with someone who is drunk. And when I did that in Guatemala, I made that statement in Guatemala, and these high school audiences, half the kids, unconsciously lowered their bodies, which told us that like half those kids are suffering from pain from someone else's alcoholism in their families. And then number three, those negative consequences never, ever just affect the drug user. And you're going to hear from Sherry here in a few minutes. But we lost 12 kids under 18 to overdose in San Diego County last year. And when a student in a high school dies of an overdose, that death doesn't just traumatize the student and the family, it destroys their friends, it traumatizes their class, it traumatizes their teachers. There's endless examples of how one person's choice to use drugs harms so many more people in our society. And this is the tragedy. And I really would like you to think about this for a minute. The tragedy is we have more kids in more emotional pain than ever, more anxious, more depressed, more lonely, more isolated, less able to communicate it, less willing to communicate it. So they carry that pain around inside. They go to the party and one of their friends offers them these super potent drugs like meth or fentanyl or super potent marijuana or ecstasy. And the kids discover that while they're high, they choose to take the drug. While they're high, they are not feeling lonely, anxious, depressed, or anxiety, right? They're feeling popular and strong and funny under the influence. But when the drug or alcohol wears off, all the pain comes back. And now some percentage of our kids have taught themselves there is a chemical escape from that pain. And I don't believe you can ever unteach that, right? If the kid's feeling depressed and wants to self-harm and hates himself or is a victim of bullying or abuse or whatever, and they discover by popping a pill or snorting a powder, they can instantly, for a few hours, escape from that pain. And some kids want to repeat that. And that's called self-medication. And then very quickly with these drugs, you end up in addiction, which I believe is a lifelong condition. It's really sad. And this for me has become one of the most powerful slides in my presentation. I talk about how heavy drug users don't go get regular jobs to fund their drugs. They commit crimes, sell drugs, and harm themselves. And I ask the kids, how many of them know other young kids growing up in poverty because one or both of the parents spend all their money on drugs and alcohol instead of raising the kids? And I asked the kids, how many of them know friends who live in poverty or in broken homes, neglected by their parents for the same reason, when the kids having to raise themselves. And then the last one, how many of them know kids who've been victims of abuse from their own parents, when dad gets angry or mom gets, when he can't get high, or mom gets angry when she gets drunk. And I'll be honest, after every single presentation I give now, I have 11, 12, 13-year-old kids, 14-year-old kids coming up to me, crying, hugging me, thanking them for me telling them it's not their fault. Because I do, at the end of the slide, I tell the kids, look at me, everybody look at me. I said, look, if you're living any of this, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. And tragically, the reality in our society is many of the kids who live under these conditions do believe it's their fault. They don't believe there's a different future, and they don't seek help. So I plead with the kids that if they're suffering like this, to reach out to the school counselors, to the teachers for help, in growing out of this. And I have kids coming up crying every time, sharing with me terrible, terrible, sad things that are going on in their homes. So much so that I had to get some therapy. I'm talking to a therapist right now, because every single assembly, these beautiful, precious kids coming up, just sharing this unbearable sadness that's in their lives. Opioids, I explained to the kids that medicines that come from a pharmacy, from their doctor, in a prescription bottle in their name, are safe. Everything else is deadly. Today, any pill sold on Snapchat, sold on Instagram, or sold by some friend at a party is not a legitimate prescription drug. It's likely an opioid, fentanyl. The opioid we all knew about when we were younger was heroin. When I was in school many years ago, all of us knew about heroin, and my friends who used drugs would never use heroin because everyone knew it was the drug of last resort, and you couldn't quit if you started. But then we had the prescription drug epidemic, and the drug cartels in Mexico got into the prescription drug epidemic by faking prescription drugs. So these blue pills right here, made in Mexican drug labs, are the biggest driver of the drug death in the United States in the last 5 years. They're made to look like a prescription painkiller, but they do not contain any of the medicine that they're supposed to contain. They contain this drug fentanyl, and that small amount of fentanyl on the penny on the left is enough to overdose and kill me. Fentanyl gives the same high as heroin, causes the same addiction as heroin. The only real difference is it's 50 times more potent, 50 times stronger. And when it's that potent, the smallest mistake in dosing it causes death. It is not pharmaceutical fentanyl that we're worried about. Pharmaceutical fentanyl is used in surgery and cancer treatment massively on a daily basis. It's a wonder drug. This is the problem. It's clandestinely manufactured fentanyl coming out of Mexico. This is what's killing our kids and addicting so many people in our population. This slide is very powerful. It explains why the pills are so dangerous. Down at the bottom, you see graphic representations of the pills manufactured by the drug cartels. Pills coming from a pharmacy company have the same dose. The pills coming from the drug labs do not, because they're not made by scientists. Some of the pills have none of the drugs, some have a little bit, and some have enough to kill anybody who takes it. And tragically, they all look exactly the same. There's no way to test them. They're not tested. They're sold, and they're sold, and they're sold. And too many people in our population are not informed about this. They don't understand that the pills have been counterfeited so massively, and it's causing tragic consequences. These are drugs that I seized in my DEA investigations. This is what I thought the drug dealers were selling. And this is what the DEA laboratory found out that it actually was. So when we're talking about overdoses on fentanyl, there's a distinction that I and many other people make. There are overdoses resulting from people who knowingly wanted fentanyl and sought fentanyl, and then eventually just got a pill or a dose of fentanyl that was too strong. And then there's another type of death called a poisoning. And that's where someone in our population thinks they're buying a legitimate prescription drug. They may have a prescription for it that ran out, or they may know that it works for them and they don't want to go get a prescription. So they think they're buying these legitimate prescription drugs on the street, and they don't know that it's fentanyl, and that fake counterfeit pill kills them. My first investigation involving this was in San Diego in 2016. These pills were coming across 1,000 at a time, hidden in these blankets. We thought that was a lot of pills back then. 2020, it's 100,000 at a time. 2021, 2022, we're now seizing 1 million pills at a time. Multiple recent seizures of more than 1 million fake pills coming in from Mexico. And I know, as a law enforcement officer, if we seize 1 million pills, something like 10 million got through to our population. And fentanyl comes in a powder. And numerous people now are dying because they think they're buying cocaine or methamphetamine that's also coming in a white powder. And they don't know, either they're deliberately deceived by the drug dealers, or they just don't know what they're doing, and they don't understand that it's fentanyl. And now we have this problem. It's gotten a lot of publicity. They're calling it rainbow fentanyl. I'm fine with that name. It's the same fentanyl. It's just been manufactured like this to make it more attractive to our kids. There's some discussion around that. There are some experts saying that that's not been proven yet. But in my 31 years of talking to drug traffickers, I will unequivocally state that the only reason that somebody manufactures fentanyl like that with adding food coloring is to make it attractive and marketable to our youth in this country. And now the drug cartels in Mexico aren't even bothering to fake the pills anymore. I mean, these pills came from the same machines as the blue ones. They have the same markings, but now they're coming across in these beautiful pastel colors, which to me means that they realize Americans don't need to be tricked anymore, that Americans have been trained to want fentanyl, and they're selling it now in these attractive, colorful forms to, sell to younger audiences. But the candy fentanyl is not new. These are seizures from Georgia from a year ago. So this threat's been around for a while. And for me, the unfortunate side benefit of this candy-like fentanyl is that it's woken up our adult population. So my work, the request for my work has just exploded in the last few weeks. I'm doing 37 this month. That's too many. I'm tired. But hopefully, that attention will bring more resources and we'll get more people out in the schools. I'm not alone doing this. I work with some wonderful people in San Diego who work with me. As of yet, we're not having to say no to any school that asks for us, but we're getting close. And Narcan is a powerful tool. I believe Vista is working on it or already has it, and they can address that when we're done. I think every school needs to have Narcan. It is a chemical antidote for an opioid overdose. It will not help with a methamphetamine or cocaine overdose, but it will help, or may very well help, with an opioid overdose. But it's not a drug prevention policy. To me, having Narcan on a school is tantamount to having fire extinguishers. Narcan's in case a kid overdoses at school. My prevention policy is let's get less kids using it so we have less risk of those kids overdosing at school. And as scary as we are, the situation is today, where are we going to be in 5 years? I am profoundly worried about this. New drugs are being invented every day to replace fentanyl. There are multiple forms of fentanyl that are being invented. And on the East Coast, they're mixing fentanyl with xylazine, which is a very potent synthetic horse tranquilizer. So as dangerous as our drug situation is today for our kids, it's just getting radically more dangerous every year. Methamphetamine is a scourge in San Diego. It's not being talked about enough. And vast quantities are coming in from Mexico. I'm calling it a tidal wave. The drug does not look dangerous. It comes in those pretty crystals, and the people selling it always claim it's pure and safe. But the situation's changed. 10 years ago, a pound of methamphetamine in San Diego was $15,000 wholesale. That's now dropped to $1,500 wholesale. And it's 99% pure. And there's just seems like to be endless quantities of the drug flooding into our society. And it doesn't cause the sudden overdose death that fentanyl does. Methamphetamine is a slower killer. The users suffer chronic heart attacks and mini strokes and things. And over the years, their bodies just wear out. And then I finish my school presentations talking about marijuana and vaping. Every school I go to, if I ask the school, what's your biggest problem? They shout vaping because that's what they see. That's what the kids are bringing to school. That's what the schools are having to deal with. I counter that with my argument that the bigger fear I have is that some percentage of the kids in every school might still be willing to take these counterfeit pills that will kill them. I don't want our kids vaping, but that's a survivable problem. But the kids being willing to take what they think is a safe drug and dying from it is something we really need to rush to address right now. I explained to the kids, it's not healthy in the vaping, and they get it at the end. And then I transitioned to THC and marijuana, and I talked to a lot of teenagers, and when we legalized recreational marijuana, one of the unexpected consequences was it told our teenagers, for whom it's not legal. It's only legal in California for over 21. But in our teenagers, that sent the message that it can't be dangerous. They tell me that. Well, our government wouldn't have legalized something that's dangerous, Rocky. And the problem is it is dangerous for teenagers. I argue that the vast majority of teenagers who smoke marijuana are doing it to get stupid and stoned, just like my friends did when I was in school. But many of them, if I ask them, why are you smoking weed? Will tell me, but it's medicine, Rocky. And I addressed that. I had a sister that perished from cancer and another sister that's struggling with cancer. And both of my sisters, while I was still an active duty DEA agent, discovered that cannabis products help them with their symptoms. And I think that's a miracle. And if a teenager has a marijuana recommendation from a doctor for a diagnosed medical condition, I recognize it as medicine. But I think 99% of our teenagers who use THC don't have a recommendation, and they're just using the fact that it's quote unquote medicine as a pretext to justify their own use. And what I need you to understand, it is not the same weed. When I was in middle school here in San Diego and my friends offered me weed, it was 4% THC. That's the natural marijuana plant, 2, 3, 4% THC. Bob Marley smoked that natural plant and got plenty stoned. My friends got plenty stoned. But the people commercializing marijuana, illegally and legally, are now using a plant that produces 25 to 30% THC in the leaf because they want to improve their profits. And what too many parents don't understand is, oh, my kid's just smoking a joint. What's the big deal? Well, that joint that your kid's smoking might be 5 or 6 or 7 times stronger than the joints that were smoked 30 years ago. And nobody I knew chain smoked weed, but that's what the kids are ingesting. And then based on the surveys, most of our kids are telling us they don't even like smoking joints. They prefer to ingest these concentrates. in the vapes or in pipes or however they want to consume them. But the potency of this stuff can be 80 to 90% THC. And I'm very angry at the industry. I mean, they give these clever names, bubble hash and crumble and butter. I mean, it's all being done to make this stuff seem attractive and safe to our youth. But it's not safe for our youth. I mean, the New York Times is hardly, a rag of a newspaper. And they're publishing articles talking about psychosis, addiction, and chronic vomiting in our teens from the super potent weed. We know this is a problem, but why are we not warning our families and our students, stay away from this stuff? It's a diagnosed addictive drug. It's not as addictive as meth and coke and heroin, thank God. But in the DSM, it's listed as an addictive drug. But when's the last time we heard a prominent psychiatrist or psychologist on TV warning our population about the addictive properties of marijuana? And the CDC and the National Institute of Drug Abuse say, well, it's only 17% of teens become addicted. Well, my God, when you have hundreds of thousands, potentially millions of teens smoking the super potent weed, 70% addicted is a huge number. In 2017, scientists were discovering the harm in the brains of developing kids. This is not new. And of course, over the last 5 years, the potency of the weed and the number of people smoking the potent stuff just continues to increase. And these are recent articles about pregnant women smoking weed or eating the edibles or however they're taking it. And cannabis use in pregnancy, more anxious and aggressive child. Cannabis use in pregnancy, more autism. Cannabis use in pregnancy, more premature birth. And when I first found these articles, my initial reaction was, my God, how many babies are being born damaged by marijuana in the United States to allow so many scientific studies of these babies? And in 2022, Senator Pan in California tried to implement or try to pass a bill to require mental health warnings on the potent marijuana, and it got shot down. And the main opponent, of course, is the cannabis industry. And I don't understand. They said, well, nobody's going to read the labels. Well, why not put labels on it anyway? If science is documenting this damaging our kids, let's put the warnings on there. And if people ignore them, they ignore them. And I don't understand why the cannabis industry isn't actually hiring people like me to go into the schools and tell our kids, look, we think it's great for adults. It's legal for adults. We think it's great for adults. You shouldn't use it as a teenager. But we're not teaching our kids this. And then, of course, the reaction I get from the kids is, but Rocky is just weed. And I get that everywhere I go. Rocky is just weed, because our culture has taught our kids it's not even a drug. But I tell the young kids in my audiences, if they don't believe me, if they've smoked weed or everybody in the world smokes weed and they think it's perfectly safe and that I'm lying about all this harm that comes to teenagers. And I tell the kids, this same harm does not come to adults. We're not finding big scientific studies finding psychosis, I believe, in adults who start smoking. This is all happening in the younger kids and the developing kids, or most of it is. And so I tell the kids who don't believe me, prove me wrong. Do this Google search, teen brain damage marijuana. And I would encourage all of you at home, do this Google search, read some of the articles yourselves, sit down with your kids and read some of these scientific articles documenting all the harm that's happening to our teenagers. And that's really where the conversation needs to happen, right? I mean, I'll give your kids an hour and a half lecture, but I'm hoping that you will have this true conversation at home on an ongoing basis. And I'm about to finish, but I've identified these 5 areas of societal failure that are directly connected to drug abuse and we're not addressing. Our failure to address the drug consumption problem is resulting in these problems. These are statements that have been given to me by young children after my assemblies. I was a crack baby. I should have 2 sisters and a brother, but my mom killed my baby sister with drugs. 2 kids today came up and shared tragedy with me. A kid yesterday told me she's 14, living in a group home because her mom abused her, and one of her 15-year-old friends in the group home died a week or 2 ago from an overdose in her arms. I mean, it's just tragic sadness that so many of our kids are living in as a consequence of someone else's drug abuse. School failure. How much of our absenteeism and truancy in the schools, how much of our learning disability issues, and how much of our discipline issues in the schools and our school safety issues have a direct line connection to drug abuse, either in the students or their home environment. Many students tell me they're afraid to go to the bathrooms in their schools because they don't want to be exposed to the vaping that's going on in those bathrooms. And we're spending huge money as school systems to try to remediate these problems. What if we were able to magically take some of that money, just 5%, and spend it on the front end on doing adequate prevention, trying to reduce the number of kids going down this road? I'm not an expert on teen suicide, but I'm horrified about how it's skyrocketing right now. And we've known for decades that there's a strong increase in the likelihood of suicide in people who are substance abusers. Juvenile crime. This article is from 21 years ago, talking about data from 20 years prior, documenting a straight line connection between teen drug use and juvenile crime. And we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a year per kid in our juvenile hall system. Again, what would be the savings to society if we got out and started teaching kids from a very young age to avoid using drugs? And maybe we will convince a few not to. And then our homeless problem. I found all sorts of data where the homeless themselves identify that substance abuse is the number one or number two cause of their being homeless. But the data I can't find, and I'm curious why I can't find it, when did those currently homeless people start using? And it's just an opinion of mine, but I would wager that the vast majority started using drugs in middle and high school to self-medicate either emotional problems or mental health problems. And they began a slow glide of self-destruction where they ended up now living in this abject misery on the streets. And we've known for decades that substance abuse has a straight line connection to the homeless problem. So, my response to the people that tell me that drug prevention doesn't work is that I've been able to go 800 times, 15 different countries, multiple different cultures. In Mexico last week, I was giving 2-hour lectures and the kids were cheering my name afterwards. They feel motivated because I meet the kids where the kids are. So how you message this is everything. And I've worked very, very, very hard to convince the kids that I'm authentic. I know what I'm talking about, and I want them to be empowered to make decisions. I don't tell your kids once what they should or shouldn't do. This is what happened to all these other people. This is why I think it happened. I don't want it to happen to you. And now you know the consequence. And the kids react extremely positively. And that's the end of my presentation. I tell the kids, you got one life, one body, one mind, and one heart. And if you damage those things, you don't often get do-overs. And it's so unfortunate. So that's the end of my presentation. Hopefully you get a flavor for what I've done and what I will be doing in the Vista schools. And certainly I'm here to answer any questions, and I'll pass it back to you, Dr. Doyle.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Sherry, I think you wanted to jump in and share a few words. So we appreciate you being here tonight. Are you able to unmute? If you're not, I will fix it right now. Moment, Sherry. Go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Doyle. First of all, thank you, Rocky, for being here and doing this again. This is the second time I've gotten to listen to Rocky. The first one was when he presented to San Marcos about, 5 or 6 weeks ago. And I really want to get more involved in this. You and I need to maybe have a sit down somewhere and see how I can get better involved. As far as everyone else goes, thank you all for being here. I can't stress enough the importance of this for you and your families. I'm a teacher at Vista High School, and I'm going to try and get through this. I will warn you in advance. It's very difficult for me. This has hit way too close to home and way too recently. So as I said, I teach at Vista High School, and I work and see your kids every day. And last December on Christmas Eve, I lost my middle son, Cole, to a fentanyl poisoning. Everyone keeps correcting me to say poisoning. It was very sudden and very shocking. My son was 30 years old. He had grown up and gone to high school and was in the top of his class in school. And after high school, developed a drug issue. He got into rehab, ended up having to go through a couple times before he finally straightened his life out and was doing really well. He had moved to Texas and was just on the verge of completing his apprenticeship program to become an electrician. He was 3 weeks away from that. And he was coming home for Christmas. And I was at San Diego Airport waiting for him to get off the plane that he never got off of. That morning, while he was finishing packing and getting ready, he took what he thought was a Xanax. My son, because of his drug use earlier in life, or at least this is what I believe, because he wasn't an anxious child, but he was, as an adult, had developed horrible anxiety. And so if anything was super making him anxious, and a lot of times being around family or traveling or things like that triggers anxiety. But he took what he thought was a Xanax, and he never made it out of his apartment. So I cannot press upon any of you enough the importance of us starting to educate our kids. High school's great, but that's too late. We need to be educating these kids in elementary school, in middle school, and sending this message, giving them, empowering them to know what can happen to them from just the smallest thing. Like I said, my son developed anxiety because of that. And because of that anxiety, he later in life, when things were finally good in his life, ended up taking a Xanax to relieve anxiety and never woke up from it. So all I can say to you is please encourage your friends to listen to this audio, because I understood earlier, I think it's being sent out to families.
Yes.
Encourage them to listen to it. Encourage your kids to be present on the days that these assemblies hit their schools. And please educate yourself some. Even just listening to Rocky 5 or 6 weeks ago, when I learned so many things that I didn't even know. So please, like I said, I don't want anyone, if I could wrap everyone up and never have them go through what I've been through in the last 10 months, I would. So just please make that something that you guys find a little more time to educate yourself on.
Sherry, thank you so much. I'm so sorry for your loss. So
Thank
sorry.
you.
But we do appreciate the courage it took to come and share your story with us. I know that there are a couple of questions in chat, Dr. McKeon. There aren't many, but I think if Rocky's okay to answer a few, perhaps you can read them. And Rocky, are you able to answer a few? I'm not sure if he is or not.
Well, yeah, I mean, just a couple. It is everywhere. I was just up in Idaho teaching school resource officers in Idaho. I'm sorry, I'll turn on my camera. I was just up in Idaho teaching school resource officers about this, and they're seeing it too. It just takes one kid moving in from outside of an area with the wrong family connections, and all of a sudden you've got a big problem. Our society is still in denial, Dr. Doyle. I mean, there's just a lot of education leaders don't understand how radically the world's changed around us and our kids. And so again, I commend you and your staff and Cherie and everybody for really stepping up and opening the doors to Vista. There's a question about Narcan. I don't have it. I don't have any kids or, are at risk. It is widely available now. If you wanted to email me or email the district, we can find out some local resources. I know the County of San Diego has some agencies that are providing it for free to families that want to have it. But again, it's not a drug prevention policy, right? You got to remember, it's not the perfect answer to this issue. If you're not there when your kid's using the drug, then Narcan is not going to do a bit of good. We have to be careful about giving it to our kids. I have talked to teenagers. Our kids are so cynical today. It's really scary. I've talked to teenagers who know about fentanyl and know about Narcan, and they call Narcan designated driver. So there's a subset of our teens that if they get a hold of Narcan, they feel it's now safe to use fentanyl because they don't understand that it may take, several Narcans to save one person. They'll give one kid the Narcan and the other kids will use the fentanyl. They don't understand this. That's not going to save them. So we need to be careful and educate. Yes, ma'am.
Rocky, sorry, I just want to chime in on that. Even if you have Narcan in your home, if you're going to need that, trust me, there'll be another time you won't be there that you would need it. So by having it, it creates this false sense of security that will be okay because we have it. And the health office at Vista High School doesn't have it in there. I saw it myself. I know you questioned that earlier, Rocky, of if it was available at Vista. I'm assuming if one high school has it, they all do. But yeah, for those of you asking about Narcan, obviously it'd be great to have it, but unfortunately, if by the time you're needing it, there's more needed than just the Narcan.
Yeah. Thanks, Sherry. Just to follow up on that, I'll have Dr. McKeon give you the details, but for the parents that are on the call, our district does have Narcan. Our administrators go through a training on how to administer Narcan. I just completed my training on how to administer Narcan. But I do agree with Rocky and Sherry that Narcan's there and we will use it if we need to, but it probably will not save. It's within minutes. You have to use it within minutes in order for it to be safe. But Dr. McKeon, maybe you can give them a little bit of more information about that particular safety mechanism.
Certainly. We have Narcan in our middle schools and our high schools because that's the way the order is written right now. I understand that the order comes from the the state of California. They're in the process of writing the order for elementary schools. But right now what we're doing is we're setting it up where we've got some teams of people at the schools that will be trained. They'll be watching videos. They'll be looking at where the Narcan is located. Also part of this training is to understand how to use an AED machine and to also go through CPR training. Because just because you give them the Narcan doesn't mean that somebody might not go into cardiac arrest. So we want to make sure that the people that are there know where it is, how to administer it, how to do CPR, and use the AED machine if necessary. So in our high schools, we're just rolling this out, but what we're also going to require is that the athletic director, the athletic trainer, the coaches all go through this training as well. We do have AED machines that are located near where the athletics happen, and we also have them in our offices as well.
Yeah, so the training that we have for our staff is official training that's been approved by the state of California, and they get an official certificate of completion. In addition to that, we have them check in with the nurses. We have a whole team of registered nurses on our staff, and the nurses actually walk them through a practical application. So not only do they get trained officially, but they actually have to work practically with the nurse so they understand how that would be administered. So we're very serious about making sure our staff is prepared to support students in the event that there's a problem, but ultimately we want to avoid all of these problems. And the best way to do that is to get the information out. So Rocky, I know you've been tired and it's because you're committed to Vista schools. So I think we're going to let you go because I know you have others to do.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. There is one question that Rocky might be able to answer before we let him go.
Okay,
I
go ahead,
think it's an important one. Allie was asking that she'd love to know more about behaviors and sign usage in teens. So what are some things that they might look for, that they might notice that might lead them to think that the student is using drugs?
Well, I mean, the clear signs of opioids like heroin and Oxycontin and fentanyl are going to be lethargy in the kids. I mean, it's a tranquilizer. So it's going to sedate the kids. You're going to notice an inexplicable lethargy. If the kids are using it around you, using it at home, it's going to create a moodiness and a cycle in their emotions when they're on it and when they come off it. And, but if they're using other drugs or alcohol or marijuana, the effects are all different. So it's hard to give you a succinct explanation of what signs to look for. One of the things I tell people to look for is sudden changes in behavior and persistent changes in behavior. A kid doesn't typically go from a high-performing, well-adjusted, happy child to someone depressed overnight, and stay there. It happens over time. So if you see these changes in your children and they're going to lie to you, I mean, that's the tragedy, right? The kids that go down this road, Sherry experienced it with her son. Everyone who's ever had a loved one who's a substance abuser experiences the lies. It's amazing. These people become just very adept liars. So they'll give you any explanation they can. You want to believe them, Allie. We want to believe our kids. And they take advantage of that and they'll lie. And you just have to kind of look through the lies and don't maybe accept the answers on the face of it and ask them to really give you meaningful explanations of what's going on with them. I am not a big fan of overt drug testing kids unless there's a reasonable suspicion to do so. I'm not a fan of just like random drug testing of kids. And that's just a decision I made because I don't want to break the trust with my kids. And I feel that just random drug testing your child might interfere with that child's trust in you. Of course, obviously, if you find paraphernalia, you find them, drunk or under the influence or something. Well, that's a more direct reason to justify a direct drug exam. But I do believe that you, as parents of minors, can have your family physician do a drug screen without the kids knowing it. You can take your children in for a blood exam at a doctor, and you can privately ask that doctor to do a drug check. And then whatever the results come back, then you can figure out how you want to deal with that. Yeah. So, it's a complicated world for our kids. I'm all about protecting them, but we also have to, allow them to grow and to build trust in our relationships. And the whole thing is just so complicated.
Yeah. Thanks, Rocky. So there's one last question there I can answer it, Sheree, and then I think we'll wrap it up. I'm sensitive to parents. I'm sure they've worked all day. Is this presentation going to be recorded? The answer is yes. And we will be posting it. We'll probably post it on our website under our health and safety section. But I'll also be working with Dr. McKeon to put it in our community update so people can see it really easily when it goes onto their phone through our community updates. So Rocky, again, I want to thank you for being here. You've worked hard for our district and we truly appreciate your commitment. We will continue, Dr. McKeon and I, to get the word out. I'll probably every month remind parents of this because we care about your kids. We need your help, parents. So I appreciate you being here tonight. And we are 100% committed to supporting our students through this very, very difficult time and epidemic. Sherry, did you have your hand?
Yeah, I just had a quick question for Rocky and for both of you as well.
Sure.
Next week, I understand is going to be in Spanish. Even
Correct.
though everyone thinks I speak Spanish, I don't. So do you guys want me there or not?
We would
Uh,
love to have you there and
yes.
we will make sure that it's translated, your component.
Yeah.
Both
Okay.
Rocky and Dr. Doyle are fully bilingual and I know that they would be happy to do that for you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we're-
I
we're happy
figured
to have you.
they were, but I'm like, okay, I can't say my part. Everybody thinks I speak Spanish, but I don't.
And
Oh,
your
yeah.
presentation was so touching. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you, thank
Appreciate
you.
everyone. Parents,
Um,
again, thank you so much for being here. We hope you have a wonderful evening and we will be able to turn this video around in about a week or so. So look for it coming to you in about a week or so. Again, thank you so much, Rocky. Have a wonderful evening and we hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Good night,
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone. Good night.
Good night. Hey, oh, he went already. Okay.